Welcome to Airlines 101 with Laura, and I'm here today with Bill Ewin, who has been telling me that he has been flying for American Airlines. He flew for them for 31 and a half years before he retired. Most of the time was flying the MD-80 after he spent about a year as a flight engineer on the 727. So we're going to talk about faith and vocation and context of an aviation environment. So Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about how you go about living out your faith, like especially when you were flying with American.
Well, I think really the answer should apply to almost any job. Pursue whatever you do with excellence, and adopt the work ethic of Christ. Embrace what you do. Engage. Take an interest. Ask questions. Try to stay ahead of the airplane. Say sir and ma'am a lot. If the airplane's broken on the ground, don't just sit there like a bump on the log. Let the captain do all the work. Consult your MEL. Follow along. Play the what-if game. What if I were the captain? What would I do? If there's a legality issue or some other thing, break out the appropriate part of the company manual and try to understand it well enough to explain it to somebody else. Be proactive in your learning. Be a disciple of airline flying. And when the time comes to share the gospel, and it probably will come, your testimony will not only have the strength of your conviction, but it'll have the power of your job performance behind it too.
Excellent. I love that. Being a person of just like trying to do the best you can at your job does really give you that platform where people can then listen to you, and they will. How do you, when you were traveling a lot, how did you keep connected with your church and like with God? How did you do that?
Well, that's a great question. Of course, we can always stay in touch with God. Paul said, watch and pray. Well, we can fly and pray too, but the church part is interesting, and I think to really understand a good answer to that is to see how central the idea of seniority is in the life of any airline employee. Pilots certainly, but even flight attendants and gate agents and bag smashers and all the rest of them.
Dispatchers?
Yeah, dispatchers I think too probably. But this idea of seniority, occasionally the airline will have to award, they call it proffer sometimes, or assign different things like it could be a monthly schedule, it could be a vacation, it could be a promotion, it could be a layoff notice, it could be a lot of things. But the company needs some basis to do that, some system. And you think, well, why not merit? That's a good way to do it. Let your best person have first choice at it. Except there's a challenge with that, because if you're one of this great group of pilots who all pass their check rides, who all demonstrate proficiency and mastery of whatever it is they're required to do, they're all equally meritorious. So you can't do it based on merit purely, but you can do it based on hire date, and that's seniority. And what if you get two pilots that hire on the same date? Whichever one's older gets to go first. So that's a little bit how the seniority system works. Sometimes it's applied system-wide in the case of furloughs, but more often you see it at work within an airplane type, within a seat on an airplane. For example, let's say you have a pilot who's co-pilot, first officer, fairly senior first officer. He's got more people under him than above him. And he decides, or she decides, to upgrade to captain. If they're able to do that, they slide over to the captain's seat, but they become a relatively junior captain when they do that. So they have more people above them than below them. Now that'll change because the industry's changing so very quickly. So many people are hiring. But because he's a captain, he'll get more pay. But because he's a junior captain, he won't have as much control over his schedule. When Deborah and I hired on with the airline, we experienced this as new hires. Of course, as a new hire, you're very junior to everything. But we when I upgraded to captain, after being a senior co-pilot, I took a drop in seniority. And we had to search around for a different church fellowship. If we wanted to do church together, we had to do it somewhere else because our old church only had Sunday stuff, and I was not off on Sunday. See, with the airlines, there's no such thing as a holiday. There's no such thing as a weekend or an anniversary or a Sunday. They're just days. And if all of the senior people don't want to work on weekends, guess who gets to work on the weekends? The junior.
Or Super Bowl Sunday.
The junior guy. Yeah, or Super Bowl Sunday. You
Yeah.
can say goodbye to that for a while. You have to record that on the machine. So that's what we did. I had to search around for another church, and we found one with a vibrant, growing small group program that met during the weekdays. And so that's how we did it. You'll have to be creative. Some people find that Zoom is a useful tool, or you may want to consider just deferring that upgrade bid to that heavy piece of iron that you've always wanted to fly until you get a little more seniority under your belt.
Mm-hmm. And you talked at the beginning about, being really good at what you're doing, the disciple of the airplane, I think you mentioned. And that, you said, connected with being able to share your faith. So talk us more about that, sharing your faith on the job. Were you able to do it? How did you do it?
Yes, we can always do it, but you need to do it with discretion. You need to do it at the appropriate times. Mm-hmm. Wait till you're out of the sterile period. When you're in sterile period, you are supposed to be laser focused on what you're doing. Both of you operating the airplane in a high density environment, task saturated. It's not safe to start up those conversations down low. But when you get up at cruise sometimes, and the workload diminishes, then it comes time to verbalize, the opportunity to verbalize. But I've found one of the best ways to do that is to listen first. Listen to what the other person has to say. And however outlandish a thing it might be, because see, you already know what you think. If they were interested in what you thought, they would have asked you by now. Mm-hmm. They want to talk about what they think. Mm-hmm. So listen to them. Listen to them. But it's fair to ask questions. It's fair to say, for example, no matter how outlandish the thing was that they just spoke, what did you mean by that? Or how did you come to that position? How did you come to that belief? And that'll start a conversation. And with active listening, with enough active listening, they'll see it's kind of safe for you, safe to listen to you. And they may be a little more interested in your thoughts and why you think that way. I found that most people that believe in a God, even if they say it's just a higher power, if they believe in a God and if they're honest with themselves, they'll know that there's a tension between God and mankind and themselves. There's a problem there. There's a distance even. And how do they fix that? Most pilots want to fix things. Well, they fix it the same way most of the rest of the world tries to fix it, with some works-based religion. Mm-hmm. If I can just, there's this cosmic set of weight and balance scales, and they know they've done poorly. In their own sight, they've done poorly, let alone a perfect, holy, just God. And so if I can, the temptation is to think, if I can just do enough good things to even out that balance, mm-hmm, I can get in tight with God again and everything will be all right. Well, the bad news is there aren't enough little old ladies in the world to help across the street to ever earn our way into God's favor. We as Christians know this, but they don't always know it. This could be the opening of the window of opportunity to share the gospel, because Christ was good enough. He did the work, and because of what he did, we're in a favorable position with God. I mean, we're not innocent, but we're declared innocent, and we can rest in that.
I think.
If I could say, there's one more thing. I always found that I had a lot to learn, and I often was disappointed with my witnessing efforts. But I found that the more you do it, the more aware you become of other people, the more you learn about yourself and about what you actually believe,
Mm-hmm.
and the more you learn about witnessing.
Mm-hmm. And I liked a couple of your questions because I recognize them from a book I read
Yeah.
called Tactics by Greg Kokel. Great book. You guys should look that up. And he talks about how sometimes we just need to put a stone in the
Yeah.
person's shoe. Like, we're not here to always to like close on the
Close the
deal
sale,
and all
yeah.
this stuff. And I think that's really valuable. And in the cockpit, I guess you have a lot of time to talk and
You
listen.
do, yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting environment where you can
Yeah.
sometimes put a stone in someone's shoe.
Yeah.
Last question would be, what advice do you have for these new people who are looking at entering the aviation industry?
Well, I do actually have some advice. We as pilots evaluate and manage and hopefully mitigate risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we do as pilots. Most of the time we think of that in terms of flight, of the airplane. Well, there's another kind of risk that is a little more insidious perhaps, but it's just as dangerous. And that's the risk our flying might pose to our marriage relationship or our families.
Mm-hmm.
As pilots in the airline industry, you're going to be gone roughly half the time. If you're very senior or very junior, like we talked about before, that could change a little bit, but I'd plan on being gone away from home at least 15 days a month. Now, you might think that's good news because most civilians, most normal people out in the world work 22 days a month.
I work more than 15 days.
Yes, I know. You probably work 20 days a month or
something like that,
maybe
yeah.
50 days a month, something like that.
No.
But they work a lot more, so you think, we're in good shape. But here's an important difference. When those people work their 22 days, they might be home every night in their own bed with their own families. When you work 15 days, you're gone, or you could be gone. And no contact to speak of. I mean, we have our phones nowadays. Back in my day when I first started, we didn't have the cell phones.
Yeah.
So it was fine to phone booth. But it's going to be a challenge to not be affected by that kind of thing. Deborah and I made it a point to, whatever it cost with the phone thing, to have that contact every night
Mm-hmm.
when possible,
Mm-hmm.
and to catch up and to do what we could. It's a thing that you need to be aware of. Going into it, we were leery because we knew so many in the industry that had lost their families to divorce. We didn't want that to happen to us. But after thought, we decided to give it a go, with the caveat that we would go through an evaluation period. We'd give it 3 years. Now, why 3 years? We knew the first 2 years would be really hard because of the schedules. And it was also hard because we took a pay cut from the commuter pay.
Yeah.
We had to borrow money from our parents to live. So, but the third year, there were scheduled increases in pay. And we had enough sense even at that time to realize if we stayed in much longer than 3 years without having really addressed this, the money hooks would get into us, and we might not have the strength of character to walk away from a job like this. Mm. So, what happened? At the end of 3 years, we paid off our parents. We sat down and had a real heart-to-heart about the job, about our marriage, and decided that we had adapted. We had adapted. So, where are we now? We're happily married still after 44 years, happily retired after 31 years with the airline, We have 2 grandchildren, and life is pretty good. Now, how did that happen? God's kindness is the big thing, God's kindness, but we did make it a point, develop a system of priorities where we try to put God first, the marriage team second, kids third, and that was the order. Everything else came afterwards. And that's what we would recommend. We get back to the advice part of it. If you want to stay on the center line of God's course for your life, develop a system of priorities. Doesn't have to be these same ones. It's what we recommend. God, marriage, kids, everything else. Flying the line is not for everybody, but it can be a very rewarding profession, and it's full of lively experiences and long-lived relationships, and you can develop a lot spiritually because of it. So, if you feel like God's giving you the green light, go for it and enjoy the rest of the time.